Imagine the glittering canals of Venice, Italy, gondolas gliding through shimmering waters, historic architecture standing proud against the sky, a city synonymous with romance and beauty. Now, imagine a small, unassuming island just a stone's throw away, nestled within the same serene Venetian lagoon. An island so beautiful from a distance, yet so horrifying up close that the Italian government has forbidden anyone from setting foot on its shores. This isn't a fantasy. This is Poveglia, a place whose soil is rumored to be composed of 50% human ash. An island that served as the final, agonizing resting place for an estimated 160,000 souls. It's a place so saturated with tragedy, it has earned a chilling title, the most haunted island on Earth. What happened on this tiny patch of land to create such a legacy of terror? How did a place of refuge become a gateway to the afterlife? And what secrets are still hidden behind its crumbling walls and overgrown vegetation? The story of Poveglia is not just a ghost story. It's a harrowing journey through the darkest chapters of human history, a tale of plague, madness, and a darkness that refuses to fade. The Venetian lagoon is a sprawling, shallow bay of the Adriatic Sea, home to over 100 islands, including the famous city of Venice itself. Just 4 miles south of St. Mark's Square, Poveglia sits quietly, divided into two sections by a small canal. From afar, it looks deceptively peaceful. Its most prominent feature is a tall, slender bell tower, a campanile that pierces the skyline, a lonely sentinel watching over the abandoned buildings below. The island is lush, green, and wild, nature aggressively reclaiming what humanity has forsaken. But this verdant veneer conceals a foundation of bone and sorrow. The very ground beneath the wildflowers and tangled vines is a mass grave of unimaginable scale. For centuries, this island was not a place of life, but a receptacle for the dead and dying. The Italian government restricts all access. Local fishermen give its shores a wide berth, afraid of snagging human bones in their nets, a shockingly common occurrence. The water taxis that ferry tourists around the lagoon will refuse to take you there. Poveglia is an outcast, a pariah island left to stew in its own dark history, its silence broken only by the lapping of the waves and, as some locals swear, the faint, chilling chime of a bell that was removed decades ago. But Poveglia was not always a place of death. Its history stretches back nearly 2,000 years, to the final days of the Roman Empire. In 421 AD, as barbarian hordes led by Attila the Hun swept across the Italian mainland, people from the cities of Padua and Este fled for their lives. They sought refuge in the marshy, defensible islands of the lagoon. Poveglia, then known as Popillia, became one of these safe havens. For centuries, the island community thrived. The population grew, and its strategic location helped it become a significant, albeit small, political and economic center. The residents were primarily fishermen and salt producers, living a peaceful and self-sufficient existence, shielded from the turmoil on the mainland. By the 9th century, the island's population was in the hundreds, and it was governed by its own leader. For a time, it was a small but prosperous community. This golden age, however, was not destined to last. The turning point came in the late 14th century with the War of Chioggia, a brutal conflict between the rival maritime republics of Venice and Genoa. Due to its strategic position at the entrance to the lagoon, Poveglia became a battleground. In 1379, the Genoese fleet attacked. The island was ravaged, its fortifications destroyed, and its residents were forced to flee to another Venetian island, Giudecca. After the war ended, Poveglia was left deserted. It remained an empty, forgotten piece of land for over a century, a silent memorial to a once thriving community. But its emptiness made it a blank canvas, one upon which Venice was about to paint its most horrific masterpiece of suffering. The island's darkest chapter began with the arrival of the Black Death. The bubonic plague swept across Europe in the 14th century, and it returned in devastating waves for centuries to follow. Venice, as a bustling international trade hub, was exceptionally vulnerable. Its ships brought back not just silks and spices, but also disease-carrying rats. The city was repeatedly crippled by outbreaks, with plagues in the 16th and 17th centuries wiping out nearly a third of its population. The Venetians, desperate to control the contagion, pioneered the concept of quarantine, derived from the Italian words quaranta giorni, meaning 40 days. They established the world's first quarantine stations, known as lazaretti, on isolated islands in the lagoon. Lazaretto Vecchio, or the Old Quarantine Island, was the first, established in 1423. Here, ships and crews suspected of carrying the plague were forced to wait for 40 days before being allowed to enter the city. But as the plagues worsened, more space was needed. The system evolved. A second island, Lazaretto Nuovo, was designated for quarantining goods and healthy individuals from infected ships. But what about the people who were already sick? What about the citizens of Venice who developed the telltale buboes, the fever, the delirium? For them, there was a third, final destination. This is when the empty, waiting island of Poveglia was called into service. It became a lazaretto novissimo, a place for the terminally ill, the confirmed plague victims. Poveglia was not a hospital, it was a dumping ground, it was a death sentence. Once you were sent to Poveglia, you never came back. The journey to the island was one of abject terror. Venetian authorities would move through the city, dragging the sick and dying from their homes. Men, women, children, none were spared. Even those who showed the slightest symptom or were merely suspected of being ill were rounded up. Families were torn apart. They were loaded onto barges and shipped across the lagoon to the island of no return. Upon arrival, there was no care, no medicine, no comfort. The victims were simply left amidst the thousands of others already there, crammed into makeshift shelters or left exposed to the elements. The healthy were thrown in with the sick, the living with the dead. The island became a writhing mass of human suffering. The air was thick with the stench of death and the sounds of agony. As people died, their bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. The sheer volume of corpses presented a new crisis. To prevent further spread of the disease and to make room for the constant influx of new victims, the Venetian authorities resorted to a gruesome solution: mass burnings. Giant pits were dug, and bodies were thrown in by the thousands. They were doused in accelerants and set ablaze. For days on end, massive pyres burned on Poveglia, sending plumes of thick, black, oily smoke into the Venetian sky, a constant, horrifying reminder of the plague's toll. It's from this period that the island's grim soil was formed. The countless cremations saturated the earth with charred bone and human ash. It is said that over 160,000 people met their end on Poveglia during the plague years. 160,000 souls, their final moments filled with unimaginable pain and despair, their ashes becoming part of the very land. The island was transformed from a forgotten outpost into a colossal, open-air tomb. After the plague subsided, Poveglia was once again abandoned, left to its ghosts and its ghastly legacy. For a brief period in the early 19th century, Napoleon Bonaparte recognized its strategic value. His forces used the island as a military outpost, storing weapons and gunpowder there. It was during this time that they likely uncovered the vast plague pits, unearthing the horrifying scale of the death that had occurred. But this was just a brief interlude. The island was soon abandoned again, its silence returning, waiting for the next chapter of its dark history to be written. That next chapter would arrive a century later, and it would be a chapter not of physical sickness, but of mental anguish. In 1922, a large, imposing complex was constructed on Poveglia. It was to be an asylum, a psychiatric hospital for the mentally ill. On the surface, it seemed like a logical choice. The island's isolation provided a secure location, far from the bustling city, where patients could supposedly receive care in a tranquil environment. The reality, however, was anything but tranquil. Poveglia was not a place of healing. It became a place of exile, a prison for those deemed insane. The hospital's remote location meant that what happened within its walls was hidden from public view, free from scrutiny. And what allegedly happened there became the second great legend of Poveglia's horror. Patients sent to the asylum reported seeing the spectral figures of plague victims and hearing whispers and moans echoing through the corridors at night. They complained of an oppressive, terrifying atmosphere, but their claims were dismissed as symptoms of their madness. The staff, too, felt the island's oppressive weight, but it was the patients who bore the brunt of its terror, both real and perhaps supernatural. The most infamous story from this era is that of a particular doctor. The legend speaks of a physician who was not interested in curing his patients, but in using them for his own twisted experiments. He was said to be a proponent of the lobotomy, a barbaric surgical procedure that involved severing connections in the brain's prefrontal cortex. At the time, it was considered a legitimate, if crude, treatment for mental illness. This doctor, however, took it to a sadistic extreme. He allegedly performed countless lobotomies on his patients without their consent and often without proper anesthesia. He used crude tools like hand drills, chisels, and hammers. He believed the bell tower, the island's highest point, was the perfect, secluded location for his gruesome work. He would drag his victims to the top of the tower and perform his experiments, their screams lost to the wind and the waves. According to the legend, the doctor's cruelty did not go unpunished. He began to be tormented by the very things his patients had complained about. He saw the ghostly apparitions of plague victims and heard their tormented whispers. The spirits of the island, it was said, drove him to madness. One day, he snapped. Driven insane by the ghosts he had refused to believe in, he climbed to the top of the bell tower, the site of his own atrocities, and threw himself from the parapet. But the story doesn't end there. A nurse, who supposedly witnessed the event, claimed that as the doctor fell, a strange, ethereal mist swirled up from the ground and enveloped his body, choking the life out of him before he even hit the earth. His death was not a simple suicide. It was the island itself and the souls of his victims exacting their revenge. The hospital on Poveglia finally closed its doors in 1968. The island was briefly used for agricultural purposes, but it was soon abandoned for the last time. The buildings were left to decay, and the legends were left to fester and grow. Whether the story of the evil doctor is historical fact or a chilling piece of folklore that evolved over time is impossible to say for sure. Records are scarce, and the lines between history and myth have become hopelessly blurred. But the story persists, adding another thick layer of horror to Poveglia's already terrifying reputation. With a history so steeped in mass death, disease, and mental suffering, it's no surprise that Poveglia is widely considered one of the most haunted locations in the world. The sheer volume of negative energy concentrated on this tiny island is staggering. It has become a magnet for paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and anyone with a morbid curiosity about the darker side of history. Those who have dared to illegally set foot on the island report a common set of terrifying experiences. The most frequent claim is the sound of disembodied voices and blood-curdling screams echoing from the abandoned asylum. Visitors report being overcome with an intense feeling of dread and of being watched by unseen eyes. Many have claimed to be physically affected, feeling pushed, scratched, or choked by an invisible force. The figure of a small plague victim, known as Little Maria, is said to haunt the island, crying for her parents. The ghost of the evil doctor is also said to remain, his tortured spirit forever trapped in the bell tower from which he fell. The bell tower itself is the source of one of the most enduring paranormal claims. As mentioned, locals from the nearby islands of Lido and Pellestrina have sworn for decades that on quiet nights, they can still hear the Poveglia bell tolling across the water. This is physically impossible. The bell was removed from the tower in the late 1960s, shortly after the hospital closed. Yet, the phantom chimes persist, a ghostly alarm that serves as a constant reminder of the island's dark past. Poveglia's reputation has been amplified by television. Paranormal investigation shows like Ghost Adventures and Scariest Places on Earth have featured the island, bringing its chilling stories to a global audience. During their investigation, the Ghost Adventures crew claimed to have been overwhelmed by dark energy. Their host, Zach Baggins, even claimed to have been briefly possessed by an angry spirit. These programs, while sensationalized, captured compelling audio phenomena, unexplained voices and screams that seem to corroborate the island's haunted reputation. They painted a picture of a place where the veil between the living and the dead is terrifyingly thin, a place where the tortured souls of the past are not at rest. But where does the line between paranormal phenomenon and scientific reality lie? Can any of Poveglia's terrifying claims be explained? Let's start with the ground itself. The claim that the soil is 50% human ash is likely an exaggeration, but it's rooted in a grim truth. Archaeological surveys and casual digging have confirmed that the island's soil has an unusually high concentration of human remains. For centuries, Poveglia was a burial ground, and the mass cremations of plague victims undoubtedly left a permanent mark on the island's geology. Finding a human bone on Poveglia is not a paranormal event. It's an archaeological certainty. Then there is the power of suggestion. Poveglia's history is so well known and so profoundly disturbing that anyone visiting is already primed for a frightening experience. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines. In a dark, crumbling, and notoriously haunted asylum, the creak of a floorboard is not just the wind, it's a footstep. A flicker of shadow is not just a trick of the light, it's an apparition. The human mind, when confronted with such a terrifying environment and backstory, can easily manufacture its own ghosts. The legends themselves, particularly the story of the lobotomizing doctor, lack solid historical verification. It's a fantastic story, but it may be just that, a story. Folklore often arises to explain tragic places, and the tale of the doctor provides a neat, moralistic narrative of comeuppance. It's possible the story was embellished or even invented over the years, a ghost story created to match the ghostly atmosphere of the abandoned asylum. However, even for the most hardened skeptic, Poveglia is an unsettling place. The sheer, undeniable historical weight of suffering is palpable. You don't need to believe in ghosts to feel a profound sense of sadness and horror when standing on ground that holds the remains of 160,000 people. The island's atmosphere is a testament not necessarily to the supernatural, but to the very real and enduring scars of human tragedy. Today, Poveglia remains in a state of limbo. The island is owned by the Italian state and remains strictly off-limits to the public. Visiting requires special permission, which is rarely granted. The buildings continue their slow decay. The hospital is a crumbling shell, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over the lagoon. Walls are covered in graffiti left by the few urban explorers and ghost hunters who have dared to trespass. Nature is running rampant, with vines and trees swallowing the man-made structures, slowly pulling them back into the ashen earth. Over the years, there have been several attempts to give the island a new life. In 2014, the financially struggling Italian government put Poveglia up for auction on a 99-year lease, hoping to sell it to a developer who might turn it into a luxury hotel. An Italian businessman, Luigi Brugnaro, won the auction with a bid of over €500,000. However, the deal ultimately collapsed. The government decided his plan for the island's future was not viable, and the sale was canceled. The auction sparked a public movement called Poveglia per tutti, or Poveglia for everyone. A local association raised money through crowdfunding in an attempt to buy the lease themselves, with the goal of turning the island into a public park and cultural center, reclaiming it for the people of Venice. While they were outbid, their campaign raised awareness about the island's fate, highlighting the conflict between preserving its grim history and giving it a new purpose. For now, Poveglia remains empty, caught between its haunted past and an uncertain future. It is a modern ruin, a monument to suffering, and a place that poses a difficult question. What do we do with places that are so deeply stained by tragedy? Can an island that served as a mass grave and a house of horrors ever truly be cleansed? From a safe haven for refugees to a charnel house for plague victims, from a secluded asylum for the mentally ill to a forbidden haunted ruin, Poveglia has worn many masks, each one more tragic than the last. It is a microcosm of human suffering, a place where the darkest aspects of our history, disease, fear, cruelty, and madness, are concentrated into a single, isolated patch of land. The number is staggering: 160,000 souls. It's a population larger than many modern cities, all ending their lives in misery on this one small island. Whether their spirits still linger in the decaying halls of the asylum or whisper on the wind that rustles through the overgrown plague pits is a matter of belief. But what is undeniable is the power of their story. Poveglia serves as a chilling reminder that beneath the beauty of a city like Venice can lie a history of unimaginable horror. It forces us to confront the past and to ask whether some wounds are too deep to ever heal, and if some places are better left to the silence, the waves, and the ghosts of their past. The bell may be gone, but for those who know the story, its silent toll still echoes across the Venetian lagoon.